Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Women in Science, How and When to Leverage Your Skills, brought to you by Women Ahead of Their Time in collaboration with the BioData Innovation Centre at the Wellcome Genome Campus. My name is Marion Perrin, and I have the pleasure to be one of your co-hosts today alongside Joe Mills. Before we get started, I would just like to remind everyone that this event will be recorded and made available later on our website. I would also like to thank everyone in the audience who submitted ideas to tailor today's discussion. If more questions arise along the way, please send them through the chat box and we will do our best to wave them in. Without further ado, we're absolutely delighted to be joined today by our outstanding panelists, Dr. Jelena Aleksic, Dr. Joana Flores, Dr. Gosia Trynka. And before asking them to tell a few words about themselves, I will quickly introduce myself. So I am a final year PhD student at the Stem Cell Institute at the University of Cambridge, and I have a strong passion for entrepreneurship. I am also a co-founder of Women Ahead of Their Time, also known as WAT, and we inspire, empower, and promote women in STEM by building a global platform to showcase different career paths. Since we'll be asking our panelists to share a fun fact about themselves, I thought I would get a head start. So outside of my PhD, I am a very keen seamstress, and I've been making most of my clothes for the past 3 years, including the outfit I'm wearing today. And with this, I will hand over to my co-chair, Jo, to also introduce herself.
Thanks, Marion, and thank you for the kind introduction. And it's a real pleasure to be working with the Women Ahead of Their Time team today to bring this event to life and to bring it to our wide audience here. So as Marion said, my name's Jo Mills and I lead on entrepreneurship at the Wellcome Genome Campus, which is located in Hinxton, just to the south of Cambridge, which of course, as many of you will know, was founded by the Wellcome Trust as part of the global endeavour to sequence the human genome some 25 or more years ago. And we have 2 research institutes on campus, the Wellcome Sanger Institute and the European Molecular Biology Laboratories European Bioinformatics Institute. At the campus, we have a vision to be the world-leading innovation ecosystem for genomics and biodata, and to aim to create a social benefit and impact by improving lives and health outcomes through our science. So we have an innovation centre on campus, our BioData Innovation Centre, which provides a home for teams innovating in genomics and biodata, including startup businesses and larger organisations. And a key focus for myself and my team is on creating the ecosystem for collaborations around innovations and ideas in our space. The other part of the work we do is to deliver events and initiatives to inspire scientists to embrace innovation and entrepreneurship and to explore alternative career possibilities. And one of the things we're currently doing is delivering a startup school for genomics and biodata for our scientists from across the campus. Like Marion, happy to share a fun, interesting fact. I'd slightly forgotten about this, but just to say, I'm on a big mission at the moment during this lockdown period to explore my village a little bit further and to take very long walks. So the last 3 weekends, I've done at least 2 or 3 5-mile walks each in different directions, and I'm having fun finding out what's round and about in the Cambridgeshire countryside. So thank you, Marion. Shall we get underway?
Yeah, sure. So maybe if that's okay, Jelena, can we start with you and maybe you tell us a bit more about yourself and of course the fun fact with it.
Sure, happy to. So hi, I'm Jelena. My academic background originally is in genomics and computational biology, and I'm a serial entrepreneur. So I finished my PhD and did 1 postdoc, and then quit academia to start a company. I got very interested in entrepreneurship because I really wanted to take the science that we were doing in the lab and translate them and really take them to patients. And I got particularly interested in rare disease diagnostics and genomic medicine and trying to speed up diagnostics for patients. I'm currently on my 5th company as a co-founder. The company I'm currently working in is called PharmEnable. And we're a drug discovery company using AI and medicinal chemistry to design the next generation of small molecules. And fun fact, I founded my first ever company when I was a PhD student, and I was a fire performer for like the entirety of my 20s. So my first company was a live entertainment agency where we did a lot of fire shows for festivals and weddings and things like that. And my former co-founder later pivoted into being a professional mermaid.
Thank you very much, Jelena. And I'm now going to ask Gosia perhaps to take up the baton and to share with us a little bit about her current position herself and a fun fact.
Sure, thank you. So I'm originally Polish, and I did my PhD in the Netherlands together with Professor Siska Weimecha, where I worked on genetics of immune diseases. From there on, I moved to my postdoc, which was in Boston and Brigham and Women's Hospital and abroad, where I tried to understand more how those variants that are associated to immune diseases actually function, what do they do, and can they tell us something about disease biology? And following that was a reasonably short postdoc, only about just a little bit over 2 years. I started my group here at the Sanger Institute in 2014. And then following up on those results, trying to understand how disease variants predispose to immune diseases. And since as of last year, I'm also director of experimental sciences of Open Targets. So I'm expanding a little bit. And fun fact, last year, just before lockdown, I got my motorcycle driving license. So as of last year, I can actually ride a motorcycle, which I do a little bit.
That is super exciting. Thank you for sharing this with us. And maybe Joana, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself as well and the fun fact?
Sure. Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you to Watt and to the Sanger Institute for inviting us for this event. About me, I'm currently strategy manager at Cancer Research UK, which many of you will know as the funder of cancer research, as the name says. And I guess the three main things that characterize me are I love problem solving. And as a kid, that meant I played a lot with Lego and with puzzles, but that's really what drove me to a scientific career and to actually see the whole world as a problem waiting to be solved. I also love learning about different things. And that was one of the reasons that made me realize that maybe actually specializing into a specific topic as in an academic career was probably not for me. And that's what took me to then try out different positions and different kinds of industries. So from a position as a strategy consultant, to an internship at the World Health Organization in their mental health department, and to now doing strategy for Cancer Research UK. And finally, I'm really driven by impact and wanting to leave a positive mark on society. And I can very clearly associate the lowest point in my career with a point when I thought I actually wasn't having a positive impact. And similarly, that's what ultimately took me to Cancer Research UK, where actually they're one of the largest funders of research in the UK, with a really important role as well in driving policies that can improve care for cancer patients. And as a strategy manager, I get to help them shape the future direction of the charity, understand how they can have more impact, and that's hugely motivating. I guess in terms of fun fact, I used to have a thing for flash mobs. And so I organized a massive pillow fight in central Stockholm at some point some years ago. And another one that I attended involved singing Somebody to Love with over 100 people next to Lake Geneva in front of a statue of Freddie Mercury. So that's my fun fact.
That's brilliant. I'm intrigued as to how we can make flash mobs go virtual, but that's probably not for today. So, but to get us underway with our discussion, it'd be good to start us by looking perhaps back to that PhD and how did we get into our academic careers, because that's a common thread amongst you all. So I'm going to start by asking Gosia, actually, perhaps Gosia, perhaps you could share with us what led you to first engage in academic research in the first place. And tell us, what was your PhD experience like?
So my academic adventure, I guess it kind of started a little bit, or was inspired in some way by some of the events from childhood. So when I was little, they diagnosed me with celiac disease. Ultimately, it turned out I didn't have celiac disease, but they put me on a gluten-free diet for 3 years. I was really little. I have no memories of that time at all. But as I was growing up, my parents would speak a lot about those events and how much impact it made on them, how difficult it was back then. It was communistic Poland. It was really difficult to get any gluten-free products. And so when I was in my master's studies, I somehow had that at the background of my head, that I wanted to go that direction of understanding how diseases develop, and actually had that kind of, I don't know, affinity for celiac disease, even though, as I say, I didn't even remember anything of that period of time. And I sent out a lot of emails to researchers in the Netherlands, asking if I could spend Erasmus exchange with them. And Siska responded to me that she would be very willing to take me on board and join her group. It later on turned out actually that I wasn't eligible for Erasmus, but nevertheless, she thought it would be great to have me in the group. And when I joined her group, I actually came through a shock, which was the research that she was doing, which was medical population genetics, was something I had absolutely zero idea of. We didn't cover that in the university. And that was somewhat terrifying experience, but also very motivating to learn about new concepts. And that's sort of how I started off in the research. And that really was also the theme throughout all of my PhD. I felt that throughout all of my PhD, she provided me with many opportunities that really expanded my capabilities, my horizon, and they really taught me that being uncomfortable is really what you need to develop in research. So you need to learn how to navigate situations when you don't understand something and you need to problem solve. When there are new technologies that are arising and you need to quickly pick up how to use them and how to use them to address the questions that you have. And not to be afraid of computational work, statistics, like all sorts of things. I think that in my PhD was the most valuable lesson that I've learned. The fact that you need to learn to be uncomfortable in science, especially in genomics, because this field is changing and evolving so fast. There's no way you can feel comfortable for very long. If you do, then you're doing something wrong.
That was really interesting. So maybe just on this point, did you always know you wanted to stay long-term in academia from this experience?
I'm not sure. I think that was something that developed throughout PhD. So, I think academia is very rewarding. It's also very tough. As you all know, there's a lot of criticism and a lot of failure in academia. So you have to be prepared to cope with that. And I think that's a skill that we can develop, but also it is very rewarding. And I was lucky enough that I joined Siska's group at the time where genome-wide association studies were just picking up. They were just delivering the results. So it was a very new field. But because of that, it was really also very exciting, and it was just growing in front of my eyes like exponentially. And I think halfway through my PhD, I thought, well, I mean, this is so exciting. I really want to stay in this field. It's probably the most exciting field to be in. So I don't think I would say I haven't stepped into my PhD knowing I would want to stay in academia, but that naturally evolved throughout my PhD, that I knew that I wanted to continue on this route in genomics and particularly in human genetics.
I see. How about you, Joana? Because I think you had an interesting transition throughout your PhD in terms of career.
Yeah, sure. So my story was a bit different in that I realized early on during my PhD that academia was potentially not for me. And I was super interested in the topic of my PhD, which was RNA methyltransferases and in neural stem cells. I found that fascinating. But I think after about a year in, I started to realize that to be in research, you need to really love that process of constant improvement and optimizing the techniques that you're using. And actually you end up specializing so much in a specific topic that for me, I had such broad interest that I realized that could possibly not really interest me in the long term or keep me interested in the long term. And so I went through a transition phase about, after 1 year of doing my PhD when I felt a bit lost. To be completely honest, I was still doing it and, finished and did my thesis and all, but I was also thinking to myself, oh my God, if I don't do this, what do I do? I've always thought I wanted to be a scientist since I was a little girl. So what else is out there? So I think there were two things that I needed to consider. On one hand, I just went to the career service, which was, I figured they had all the answers, and I started to go to career fairs and figure out what else I could do. And in particular, I ended up choosing consulting because it seemed like the type of career where I could learn about a lot of different things, which was interesting. And at the same time, I started just exploring and engaging in lots of extracurricular activities, some in a very purposeful way to kind of gain new skills, like some entrepreneurship courses or even entrepreneurship competitions to get that business awareness and learn about business plans and microeconomics and other business related topics. Others just because I found like I wanted to do something different, like organizing a conference. And through those combined experiences, I ended up developing my skills, figuring out what I liked doing, what I didn't like doing, and eventually understanding that actually the skills that I gained during my PhD are so valuable and so transferable that I had lots and lots of options available to me that I just hadn't considered before. So it was a bit difficult in the middle to have that period when I was feeling really lost, but actually I ended up realizing just how valuable that PhD experience was for my future career.
Thank you, Joana. It's good to hear that you were, always thinking about different options, during your PhD, and at the time when you sensed this perhaps wasn't, entirely going to be the pathway forever and ever. Jelena, you mentioned earlier you were also experimenting with entrepreneurship, during your PhD. So I guess two linked questions for you. If you look back to that PhD journey, what advice would you give yourself on day one, looking back if you were to time travel back to that time when you first stepped into that PhD lab? And what kind of processes did you go through to start exploring the various entrepreneurial things that you did?
So in terms of advice, I mean, you have to learn these things in practice sometime. Like when I first started my PhD, I think I had a lot of expectations that didn't quite turn out to be true about it. I love learning things, so like I had a wonderful undergrad where I learned lots of science and like I was quite engaged in a lot of different communities. And I started my PhD kind of expecting that it would be similar and that I would be like learning lots of science, having fun with it, being part of a community. And like in practice, it was quite lonely, and it turned out that like the process of learning about science and the process of practicing science looked quite different. So I found like heaven and hell are kind of like relative to the person. I found that like doing a molecular biology PhD and like kind of pipetting colorless liquids that all looked roughly identical was like roughly my idea of help. I didn't know that going in. So I think if I was kind of going back and kind of giving myself advice on day one, it would be like start learning to program now, which I did, and I ended up kind of pivoting from like a I was a molecular biologist, a bad one, and I became like a pretty decent computational biologist, and that was a good transition for me. In terms of entrepreneurship, I find a lot of scientists are natural entrepreneurs, actually, because a lot of science it's quite self-motivated. You're exploring science, you're on the cutting edge of something, and you're often kind of quite self-directed as well. So in some ways, it's a more natural transition than it might seem, and I think there's a lot of possibility to explore things without necessarily kind of going all the way in. So when I quit academia, I founded a company, but it was my third company at the time. So whereas up until then, I mean, I had one company while I was a PhD student, I had a second company while I was a postdoc. So I think there's a lot of things you can do on the side. And they also don't have to be kind of raising money and scaling a company to learn about entrepreneurship. You can take anything, take a hobby, take an interest, start offering consulting for areas of expertise that you have. It's something that I've helped a lot of academics kind of set up consultancies because it's something that I think academics do very naturally. You have areas of expertise, you can kind of go ahead and offer them as a service to people, and that process of finding customers and setting that up is, I think, very entrepreneurial. In terms of how I ended up kind of quitting academia and starting a company, there's a lot of different competitions that you can enter that are kind of designed to sort of teach academics and kind of ease us into kind of more entrepreneurial world. The first one I ever did was actually with Aga, who's also here today, and we had a team that entered Biotech Yes about 8 or 9 years ago now, which was super fun. And they teach you the kind of principles you need to put together a business plan. It's a different language and it's a different world, but I think one of the things that pretty much all PhDs and postdocs I know have in common is that we all love learning stuff. So definitely kind of don't be afraid to dip into new things. And there's a lot of opportunities, kind of particularly when you're attached to universities. There's so many different kind of competitions and accelerators and incubators. There's a lot of places to learn, and there's a lot of kind of community to tap into that can kind of help you on that journey.
Yeah, these are really good ideas, and you all three seems to have explored quite a few things around. I'm just wondering, maybe a question for you three ladies, and maybe we can start with you, Gosia. How did you identify the skills you needed to be successful in your next steps, and maybe how you did to gain, because especially being a researcher and then moving to being a group leader requires a completely different skill set, I think, and yeah, would be interesting to hear how you gain these.
So I'm going to split it into two, because getting the group leader skills is a little bit different than identifying what research skills you should be developing. And in terms of the research skills, a little bit what Jelena said, but I'm just going to rephrase it. And that learning to code is really important, but I'm going to rephrase it and say that you need to learn to be curious and get yourself out of your comfort zone, because it's so easy for us to, stick with what's familiar and work in that little bubble. But then it's difficult to really grow and expand, and we're missing on opportunities. And once you really become curious and become sort of okay with that idea, okay, I'm going to be uncomfortable in this new territory for a little while, and that can be coding, that can be new technique, that can be take up on a new responsibility, starting new projects, starting a group. You just have to sort of be open to developing those new skills. And I think in some way, I don't have a recipe in terms of what skills you need to develop. I think you need to understand which direction you want to go, and then have a good assessment of what kind of skills you need to have in that respect, and invest in that. Because, I can say it's really important that you code, because currently there's so much data out there and you can do a lot. But if your passion is to be developing next generation CRISPR tools, that coding will help you for sure. But actually you need to have a super magician skills in the lab to be able to tweak CRISPR tools and so on. So I think it's really important that you just identify what it is, and don't feel limited by the fact you don't have certain skills. Actually take that as an opportunity and say, okay, well, I don't have it. It's going to be uncomfortable. I'm going for it. I think this is the right thing to do. And I thought initially I would split it, but now actually that I said this, I think starting a group in a sense is really like that you suddenly, I felt, to be perfectly honest with you, I felt uncomfortable for the first 3 years. I remember sitting at Lena Pottonen's school with one of the PhD students who asked me, when did you realize you wanted to be a group leader? And I thought, well, actually about a month ago. And until then, the first 3 years of running a group were really difficult because I didn't have the skills that you need for running the group, like, people skills, leadership skills, like all sorts of time management skills, a skill to say no to things so that you can have time for doing other things. There's a whole spectrum of skills you need to have initially, and I didn't have that. But I think, being okay with that, understanding what skills you need to develop, and then just ticking off the boxes and learning how to progress, that's something that helped me so far.
Brilliant. So how about you, Joanna? What Gosia said, did resonate with you, or would you add anything in terms of gaining skills for your next move?
It definitely resonated. Actually, I was nodding along a lot. I don't know if you noticed, but I think the whole theme of just being uncomfortable just really strikes a chord with me as well. Definitely, as I've worked in different kinds of organizations, different sizes, different industries, when you start, it's always uncomfortable. And when you're applying for those jobs, you never know if you quite have the right background. And I would say that, the more skills, the more experiences that you gather, the more adaptable and flexible you are. Actually, the world's changing so rapidly today that if you can have a kind of diverse set of skills, you actually become more able to adapt to that changing world. So it's a really good thing. That's not to say that if you are an expert in something, and if you're really good at something, that you shouldn't just become an expert, because experts will always be needed. If you're good at a particular research skill or a particular programming language, that is always going to be needed as well. I think in terms of skill development, it was a bit of an evolution for me to go from when I was starting out thinking a bit more, with my skills, what can I do that is not research, to then go and identify, once I realized what was out there, what were the gaps that I was missing maybe in my experience. And I did that by a combination of, from career advice to talking to people who are working in the areas that I wanting to go into. You'd be surprised how open people are to people just reaching out to them on LinkedIn and asking them a few questions. That was something that I didn't think I could do when I started out, but that I started doing, and people do it to me as well. And it's really a way to just gauge a bit if a role that you might want to do is actually suited for you or not. And I would also say, just to finish, that it's really a work in progress. I don't think you ever stop developing your skills, that you ever stop learning. I'm now doing a master's in public health because at some point I realized that of all the different things that I tried, that was a topic that I was most interested in. And I just decided to go for it because I wanted to know more and develop my skills in that particular field. So it's not a destination, it's a journey, working on yourself and working on your career.
Thank you. I see Jelena nodding along. Are you also learning on the way and keep on extending your skills?
Oh yeah, all the time. It's I love learning new things, and I think there's something about our generation as well. I mean, I grew up in former Yugoslavia. Kind of my family moved very quickly at one point to a different country, so I kind of grew up in turbulent times. And then our entire generation kind of started work after the 2008 stock market crash, where just kind of employment was very kind of insecure. And I think it hasn't gotten any better for the kind of current younger generations entering work either. And I think a lot of us are very used to kind of continually learning new things and continually kind of shifting to different careers, because I think stable jobs, I think, maybe existed 30 years ago. They don't for a lot of us. But something that I have a lot of confidence in is I just love acquiring skills. I do it all the time, and it's not particularly strategic. It's entirely kind of interest based for me. So kind of I'll start meddling with one thing, I'll get quite good at it, move on to something else, and it's something that I feel like it's possible to kind of not be necessarily the best at any one thing. I'm not the best bioinformatician, I'm not the best, I don't know, but it's kind of, after a while, you have so many different skills that actually kind of make up quite a unique kind of combination. And at that point, you kind of become quite like a unique puzzle piece for the right shape of organization, if that makes sense. So, you know, if you can do like a bit of programming, a bit of this, a bit of that, and then with entrepreneurship as well. One of the things I love about it is working in small companies, you kind of pitch in with everything. It's not very specialized what you do. So you might be like kind of negotiating contracts one day, and then the next day you're trying to figure out some obscure piece of international tax that like 7 different accountants has to advise you on it. But it's kind of navigating new things and acquiring new skills is something that's really kind of part of your role. And it's something that, like, not just as a founder, but anyone joining small companies usually gets an opportunity to develop in whatever ways they want to develop and acquire quite a variety of different skills. And I think that's really important. Some people are more strategic about it. Like, some people have like a long-term plan and a set of skills. I've never really done that. I don't really tend to have a plan that's longer than kind of 6 months to a year, but I tend to kind of learn about things I love and try and work on things I love, and then just kind of see where that leads me. And generally it's led me to good places.
That's brilliant. It's great to hear from all of you that there's so much we can do by pushing ourselves just a bit out of our comfort zone and being willing to learn and grow in the process. And actually, we have to consider perhaps our careers as continual push and grow, push and grow, push and grow. I want to pick up on another point sort of related to this, but before I do, I just want to remind everyone that we do have the chat function there if people would like to contribute questions as well to the discussion here, rather than just letting Marion and I take the center stage. So feel free to add your questions. And I think the next question I had, and this is probably particularly for Joana and Jelena, is the two of you have transitioned out of that entrepreneurial career, out of that academic career pathway, and you've already talked about that actually it's not impossible to develop new skills and push yourself, but are there obstacles that might be in the way that are perhaps more challenging and difficult to overcome when you start your pathway in academia and you want to transition out into other things? So perhaps I'll start with Joana on that one, and then Jelena. What are the obstacles? How do you overcome them?
Sure. Thanks, Joe. Well, the first one I mentioned a bit, which is just even understanding the wealth of opportunities that are out there, because in academia, people think of their careers in a very linear way. You do a PhD and then your postdoc, and then if you're lucky, you become a PI. So just understanding what other alternative career paths may exist was actually one of the early obstacles. I would say once you actually start working in a different type of organization, there's an obstacle in terms of just the mindset that you're in. I think as a scientist, you're always in this constant quest for the truth and for the ever elusive, significant result. In other situations, you actually have sometimes to put something down on paper that you don't have the absolute proof of, or you haven't had the time to validate because everything moves so quickly, and you can't repeat an experiment or repeat an interview, and you just have to go a bit more with your gut and getting comfortable with that attitude to work and to being right in a different way that didn't always have evidence to back it up. I think that was a big mindset shift that you need to do. And, to overcome that, it just came with practice, lots and lots of practice, mentoring by people that I was working with, working on feedback I was given by them, and really learning to ask myself not just what was the data that was in front of me, but really what was the goal I was trying to achieve, and who whatever I was producing was for, and kind of adapting my requirement for evidence or for certainty based on the responses to those questions. And that could be quite different from the type of work you do in the lab.
Thank you. So a lot about mindset shift there. Jelena, how about you? Do you also have the mindset shift, or are there other obstacles that you feel might have been challenging along the way?
I think there's a lot of learning to be done every time you kind of switch from doing one thing to doing something quite different. That's not necessarily kind of unique to transitioning out of academia, but there's always, I think, like different communities of people care about different things. So, for example, I had quite a hard time the first time I fundraised for a company because kind of coming out of academia and like pitching your scientific work compared to kind of pitching a business case, it's pretty different. They care about different things. They use quite a different language. The thinking is different, and often you have like less evidence for the things that you're kind of going out with as well. So in academia, we can spend a long time kind of going very deep into one problem, whereas sometimes like things can move much faster outside of that. But my main piece of advice for kind of overcoming obstacles of various sorts is to find somebody else who's done the same thing and go and talk to them. So find someone who's kind of 5 years ahead of you, 10 years ahead of you in terms of like where you want to be, and get them on board. Ask them if they want to be your mentor. If you've got a company, get them in as an advisory board. Add them to your board of directors. Like have some way of kind of regularly interacting with people who can really kind of help you map out that path and have direct experience of kind of how things work. And I think that's, I love mentoring other people. I've had a lot of mentoring myself. It's something that's just been helpful in so many different settings. I used to have mentors in academia. I had mentors later for entrepreneurship. It's just so helpful, and often people really kind of enjoy it on both sides as well, because it's nice for people who are further on in their careers to be able to kind of advise and kind of have an impact on people who are only just entering the space. But that would be kind of the most valuable thing for me, is kind of finding people who've done it, and then they can kind of help you navigate the space, kind of figure out what the opportunities are, and also how to best make use of them.
Thank you. So maybe on that note, I'm going to bounce, because you just mentioned you asked people who've done it before. So do you have kind of a set career path and your ultimate goal, or you're a bit more holistic and you try different things until you really find yourself?
I guess I don't necessarily have like a long-term one, but I have goals at any given time, and I have obstacles at any given time. And so, for example, when I was fundraising for the first time, I talked to a lot of other kind of startup founders who were also fundraising or had done successfully. So to me, it's more like, this is my immediate obstacle, find somebody who can. So at the moment in Pharma we have a very experienced board of directors, and a couple of them have been doing business development in pharma and biotechs for a very long time, and it's been really valuable for me in my current role to have advice of people who've negotiated the types of contracts for years that I'm currently negotiating, for example. So it's more around kind of what are you currently working on, and like what's your kind of like missing knowledge gaps, and like where would advice be helpful. If you have a long-term career plan, then by all means also kind of find someone else who's done it before and kind of see how they've done it, and I think that's really valuable as well. But to me, it has to be kind of, I have a certain set of problems in any given time, and then I kind of go around telling people about them until somebody can help me with them. But yeah.
I see. Yeah, thank you. How about for you, Gosia? How is it in academia? Do you have a long-term plan? What might be your next step or your ultimate career goal, if you want to share, of course?
I don't mind sharing. I don't think I have it crystal clear. I'm kind of more of a person who looks at what opportunities arise. I have some long-term vision of what I'd like to achieve, but it's not very set in stone, and I often sort of evaluate very much similar, I think, to what Jelena is saying. You evaluate what's around and tailor your approach accordingly. There, especially in the field of genomics, the field is changing so rapidly that, within a year you can, I'm going to use it as an example, I'm not part of it, but you can suddenly find yourself working in the area that would be very suitable for Human Cell Atlas, and that initiative just sort of starts, and you can join into like major international efforts. So I don't think I have like a set plan where I want to be. I'm very driven by the research that we're doing in my group, and I think that will be something for a little while that will continue driving my career ambitions. But I think the predominant driver is really understanding how genetics impacts the immune system, and I will be exploring it with all sorts of different approaches that are available. And in terms of career, where it's going to take me, I don't know, but I don't know. I'm not too bothered, really.
I'm going to pick up on that now, Gosia, if I may. There's a great couple of questions coming in on the chat, and I'm going to start with you with one version of the question, then I'm going to follow up with the other two on the other one. So I think this is Ferry that's asked this question. Thank you for the great and inspiring discussions. It'd be great to hear how to overcome imposter syndrome embarking on a journey in academia. And you mentioned earlier on feeling uncomfortable at times, but tell us about imposter syndrome. Is that something you've encountered or overcome during your academic career journey?
Yes, I think, well, it's definitely something I have, I feel a lot of. And I think it's difficult to overcome, and even from talking to my very, very successful colleagues, I sometimes fear that it never goes away, and even people who I consider enormously successful, they still feel there is this imposter syndrome. I don't know how to overcome it. I think I think what helped me a little bit over the past few years is actually practicing mindfulness meditation, and that sort of helps you put things in perspective and allows you to appreciate the skills, or allowed me to appreciate the skills that I have, and just acknowledge that I don't have other skills, and ask a question: do I need to develop them in order to make myself feel a little bit better and overcome that imposter syndrome? Or is it something I'm just going to acknowledge I don't have that, it's not going to be my aspiration, I'm good in other parts, and I'm going to invest more time and effort in developing more those areas and driving myself that direction. It's a very difficult one. I think I want to say it got a little bit better in the last few years, but it's bumpy as well. It kind of, the days and months when it feels particularly strong, and then there are days and months when you feel like you're not bothered. It's not a good answer, but I don't have a good solution to how do you overcome the imposter syndrome, other than trying to believe in yourself and just acknowledging the skills that you may not have might be okay, and just putting more efforts into parts that are you're particularly passionate about.
Mm-hmm. It's a tough one, isn't it? The imposter syndrome.
And in academia, it's so hard because 90% of this job is being rejected by your papers, your grants, your ideas. I mean, I love interactions with my group because almost every time I have an idea, within 5 minutes, they completely destroyed it, which is great. It's part of the science, and you just have to learn that it is part of the science. And another thing is that this process is by no means targeted at a person. It's just a process of evaluating concepts, ideas, and it's not a perfect process. There are really good ideas that get rejected. There are really good papers that don't go into high impact factor journals, but that's not a reflection of a person as such. And I think understanding that and not taking those things personally helps in some way as well.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for the great advice on meditation and mindfulness as well, and thinking about imposter syndrome. I'm going to ask Joana next, actually. Imposter syndrome leaving academia. How does that work? What are your thoughts?
Well, it's very much present, I think, as you leave academia, as it is in many other situations. I think it's definitely a challenge to feel like you've been training for something, and then all of a sudden you are going to apply to a completely different job, where actually you're applying for that job together with people who have completely different backgrounds and experiences. And there's always that underlying thought of, are you good enough? First of all, I'm going to say that you'd be surprised actually how things that we take for granted as PhD students or as postdocs, like being able to break down a problem into specific components and work out a plan to solve it, which is something we have to do all the time in the lab. How that's actually a skill that not many people have, and that just by seeing that you have a PhD, that can make you good candidates. So don't devalue your PhD experience, because I think if you look at the bigger picture, you can be a very good candidate for the jobs that you're applying for. And then as you go on to actually do those jobs, then there are still situations when you may have imposter syndrome. For instance, I think one set of skills that you really don't develop as much during a science PhD, at least based on my experience, is stakeholder engagement. And so having to talk to lots of people, interview them, influence them, or manage a meeting or facilitate a meeting. That's something that I certainly didn't do at all during my PhD. And so going into roles where I had to do so much more of that, there was always this uncomfortable period where, again, the imposter syndrome would come nagging in the back of my mind and telling me I couldn't do it. But you start small, you grow with practice, and at the end of the day, you can do it. And there's always small techniques that you can use and implement to kind of counteract your own imposter syndrome. If you're struggling to speak at a meeting, one that worked quite well for me in the beginning was just writing down what you thought you would say if you had the courage to speak up. And then eventually someone would say the same thing. And you're like, actually, that was a good thought because someone else said the same thing. So it gives you the confidence to keep speaking up. So there's all sorts of small behaviors that you can develop to kind of fight against it a little bit as you go on.
Thank you. Any final comments for you from you, Jelena, on imposter syndrome?
Yeah, so, okay, we hear about imposter syndrome a lot, and kind of imposter syndrome in women in science, and I really want to turn this around and just, when people, like, imposter syndrome does exist, but it's just one of the questions I like to ask people is kind of, do you have imposter syndrome, or are you in a particularly hostile environment? Because if you're in a particularly hostile environment, you don't have imposter syndrome, you have reasonable anxiety. So, and often it's kind of, oh, women in science, but you might be in quite a male-dominated space, you might be in quite a sexist space. So just kind of, is your environment undermining you in some way? And if it is, can you create a better environment for yourself? Is like the question that I would start with, because I don't have imposter syndrome. Like, I'm a pretty confident person, but I've been in situations where I felt like pretty uncomfortable, like throughout my career. And I don't know if it's just me, but I've been to some pretty hostile academic seminars. So like, it's not necessarily a particularly friendly place. I mean, and you can find kind of friendly corners of it, but it's not. I don't know. One of the things about moving to industry has been that it's generally been friendlier, actually. And like, my mom loves to tell people that her daughter left the kind of harsh world of academia to go and pitch to much nicer investors instead. And it's kind of, like, there's just something about it that's, so, and my advice for that would be actually, whenever you can, like, find community, build community. So like, I have a lot of communities around kind of women in entrepreneurship, because like, we are a minority there, but those communities are super positive, and we can really kind of encourage each other, lift each other up, you know, kind of give each other the confidence to do things. And there might be communities out there already, but if not, you know, create your own groups, create your own kind of incentives, and like and if your environment is hostile, try and remove yourself from it and try and find a better environment. That's the other kind of piece of advice I'd give people. And like, I think it's important having conversations around imposter syndrome, but I really feel like conversations around imposter syndrome sometimes kind of take over the conversation, and we could spend some of that conversation maybe like critiquing the environment and creating a more positive environment. It's not as hostile, and maybe like less people would kind of struggle at that point. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Jelena. So you mentioned a lot about community. Do you have any maybe insights, and that would be addressed to the three of you, of how to empower and enable the next generation to join STEM, and especially for women? How do we inspire them and make sure this hostile environment is a thing of the past? Maybe let's start with Gosia, if that's okay.
I would actually suggest that Jelena goes on, because she had fantastic advices in here, and the community, and mentioning about the the hostile environment, I'll pick up. But I think, Jelena, you're on the roll. I'm inspired by what you're saying.
On around, thank you. Yeah, I think it's important. I'm quite self-aware about being a role model in any kind of given like public situation. I think it's really important to kind of put ourselves out there and be visible, and to kind of like be visible and be diverse, and just kind of the more diverse voices we get, the more we're able to kind of inspire people. And also kind of to make ourselves available to, you know, like mentor people, help people, just kind of generally help the next generation as much as we can in a kind of hands-on way. You know, like if you're hiring interns, pay your interns, like make sure that like people are kind of have a good working environment. If you're able to build companies, try and build companies that are positive and that have that kind of like diversity and positivity built into them. And I think that that's one of the opportunities that, like, as an entrepreneur, I love, because we get this ability to create new communities and new spaces. And yeah, also like create community wherever you can, and try and kind of do your best to be inclusive with it, and to encourage people to, you know, explore new things and to feel safe in doing so as well.
I hope you don't mind that I bounced it off at you, but yeah, I thought it was really fantastic what you were saying. I think I can maybe I think that there's change in academia. This topic is more and more now a part of the discussion. A big step of that has been the recognition that there's an issue and we need to address it. And I think there's more of conscious decisions now to ensure, to test whether there are biases in our processes, in our decision making, and I think that's really good. Jelena said about encouraging that change and making sure that's part of the environment, and I think that's also really, really important. I think in my group, I try and make sure that this is very clear. We value diversity hugely. And sort of as ourselves as the leaders, I think we have that responsibility to make sure that we are active bystanders, we voice when there are things happening wrong, and we set culture in our environment wherever we have a control of that, to make sure that the next generation of scientists, entrepreneurs, are going to be champions of diversity. And I think that's one of the ways we can implement change and make sure that diversity is really increasing with time.
Brilliant. Joana, do you have any thought on that point from your experience, which is also very diverse?
Yeah, definitely. Some builds on that. That definitely resonates with me. And the point about hostile environments is very, very true. You will be in environments that are not ideal. I think when it comes to inspiring the next generation, I think the point that Jelena brought up about role models is so true. I think there's an element of just seeing yourself in others that can really inspire you to imagine yourself in a position that maybe you just wouldn't imagine yourself otherwise. So realizing that even if you're still a PhD student, you can also be a mentor to someone who's younger than you, and kind of that ladder of inspiring others goes on and on and on from there. That's definitely a way to go. And I have to say, also representing careers in STEM as diverse careers in STEM, not just from diversity point of view in terms of gender or ethnic minority backgrounds, but also in terms of the possibilities that are out there, not just being in academia, but being in industry, working with government, working with the health system. There's so many options open to you. And I think different options will resonate with different people and attract a wider group of people to STEM careers. I think in that perspective, actually having a PhD supervisor who recognized that there are many options outside of academia made a lot of difference. And again, we go back to our support networks and people who support us through our career, because for some people, academia is the only choice, but actually having that openness to explore and to talk frankly about my options during the PhD was really good. And just to touch on that point of the culture that we can build in academia, I think it also helps if we can be quite open about challenges and quite open about, what can go wrong also during a career in STEM and in different industries. When I was working in strategy consulting, I had a burnout because the working hours was just incredibly challenging, working 60 or 70 hours per week, which is just not sustainable. It was really difficult. And actually, I found that, stopping and kind of being honest about what happened and talking about it with other people meant that more junior people were coming to me and saying, actually, I've been feeling low. Actually, I've been feeling really stressed. And just the fact that I talked about something that wasn't talked about meant that people felt like their concerns were validated. And so I think we all have a role to play in speaking up, in making sure that the work cultures that we're part of are healthy and kind of promoting everyone to have the best experience they can.
Thank you.
And if I can just say one thing about speaking up, because we're speaking about, about leaders and how they can speak up, but it's hard for us to address problems if we're not aware of them. And I would encourage trainees and whoever's listening there, if they are affected by any issues and they have a human being as a supervisor or the line manager, to actually go up and bring up those issues, because it's really difficult to act if we're not aware that there are certain issues in place. And I'm saying that because I personally experienced some situations when I was a trainee and I never brought them up. And now as a leader, I'm like, I would have loved to do something if only I knew that there was an issue. And I'm quite certain that the same would be the case for my supervisors back then. So just speak up. And if you're feeling unsure whether you can bring up any issue directly to your supervisor, reach out to HR and they will help to mediate, or they will raise that issue somehow.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And there are so many great questions coming in through the chat, but I'm realizing we're just a couple of minutes away from 5 o'clock and the end of our time together this afternoon. So I have a quick fire question which builds in some of these, and I think Marion has a quick fire question to finish off. So my quick fire question for you all, and Joanna, you alluded to it actually, and that, there's always so much to do. How can we cope with this, the multitasking, building skills, and so on, and keeping a healthy balance of our lives between our career and the outside world and the other things that we might want to do? So in just a couple of sentences, a couple of words each, what are your top tips for keeping that balance and keeping ourselves healthy and able to do our careers, but also focus on the outside world too? Gosia, to you first.
I don't multitask, so that's one thing. So I just need to break it down and just, focus on each individual task with its priority. And I think that's the key skill that I'm still developing. I don't think you can't do multiple. I can't do multiple things at the same time. I can do one thing reasonably well if I'm focused on that thing. So it all comes down to me writing down what it is I need to do at a given time and seeing what I can delegate. I have that privilege that I have a team that I can delegate to. So I think my advice is to be able to break down the problems and prioritize what you need to focus on. I don't have healthy life and work balance, so I'm not going to comment on it. I just find work as a big hobby and it drags into all parts of my life.
Okay, thank you for that. Jelena, how about you?
So time boundaries are really important to me. So for example, I have two phones. So I have a work phone and a personal phone, and the work phone just goes off after a particular time, and I'm not reachable in the evenings. I'm not reachable on weekends. I feel like there's too much kind of emphasis on being reachable all the time. And also, I'm quite careful about my working hours not kind of expanding. I think it's really important to have like a sustainable set of working hours. And for me, that's about it's about 35 hours a week. It's not more than that. And like I've done more than that in the past. And like usually, if I'm doing a lot of hours, like sooner or later I get burnt out, and then I have a period of like not working at all. So like if you're like from a productivity point of view, if you average over like a period of years, just kind of being careful about like what you're doing being sustainable. And I find it raises your productivity as well, because if you're well rested, you can kind of think about things properly. Whereas I find if I'm not well rested, I start making mistakes, and it slows me down as well. Also, like I love exercise, so just kind of making sure that there's kind of for me that there's space for that, but generally that you have enough time and space for the things that are important to you and that kind of help you rest and help you kind of recover. Yeah.
Great advice, thank you. Joana, how about you?
I think a lot of what Jelena said resonated as well. So definitely know yourself and know what you need, what energizes you, and build some time in to do those things, whether it is catching up with friends or doing your morning yoga. Just make sure that actually carve out the time to do that, even put it in your calendar. I would say also have a support network, and there's different types of support that all of us need as we go into our careers, but that can be your housemate or a friend. That can be the person at work that you go to have a rant when things aren't going well. That can be a mentor, and I think those people also help you get that perspective that sometimes when you're just in production mode and busy, you can really step out of that and get that, and talking to others can always help you maintain that balance.
That was brilliant. Thank you for all these insights. I've been taking notes. But maybe just before we wrap up, could you just tell us in one sentence, I'm going to be strict on this, one thing you wish you would have known when you were maybe in the shoes of people like me, final year PhD, trying to figure out what they're going to do and things that would have helped you make those moves? Maybe Jelena, you're nodding, so I'll tag on you first.
There are interesting, meaningful careers outside of academia that will continue to draw on your science knowledge and continue to enable you to learn new things. Brilliant,
thank you. How about you, Gosia?
Talk to people, talk to your supervisor, and talk to your friends and fellow PhD students.
Brilliant, thank you. And you have the final word, Joana.
A lot of pressure. I would say in my case, it would be that you don't need to have a master plan. What you need to do is to figure out what are your values and your strengths, and just combine those and try to find something that serves both of those things to find a position that you're really passionate about.
Wow, thank you. So with this, I think we've hit the 5 p.m. mark. So thank you so much to our panelists, Jelena, Gosia, and Joana, for today's insight. They were really interesting and a lot of wisdom that I hope you in the audience are also taking home. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Joe for being a fantastic co-chair, and the entire Sanger team, so Anka Bellu and Vika Lebdeva Baxter, for helping to bring this event to life. Thank you also to Aga from the WAT team, who also played a key role in enabling this event to happen. Please do keep engaging with Women Ahead of Their Time, either by visiting our website, so at womenaheadoftheirtime.org, or by following us on our social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, whichever is your favorite. We always welcome new people in the team. We're particularly looking for someone to join our podcast team. And I will leave the final word to Joe.
Yeah, thank you, Marion. And thank you to the whole WAT team for inspiring such a brilliant event this afternoon. I think Jelena, Joana, Gosia, thank you for your openness and honesty in delving into these topics and inspiring so many people. Just looking at the comments on the chat, we've had many questions we couldn't get to, which is a shame. And a couple of comments just in now saying 1 hour was definitely not enough. Perhaps that's something for us to review next time. But thank you again to everybody for such a brilliant discussion. And thank you, Marion, for being a great co-chair as well. And I hope we can collaborate again in the future. It's been great to collaborate on this one. So thank you to everybody, and have a fantastic evening reflecting on all of these great things that we've heard this afternoon. Thank you.